Welcome to the Thinking Abyss podcast, a philosophical journey through consciousness, reality, and the phenomena that challenge our understanding of existence. From ancient wisdom to cutting-edge theories, we explore where philosophy meets science and curiosity leads to the edge of the unknown.
I want to start today by looking at something incredibly, almost ridiculously mundane. I'm holding a glass of water, just standard tap water. It's clear, it's wet, it's refreshing. But according to the stack of research we're looking at today, this glass of water it's basically ground zero for a civil war in philosophy and physics.
It is the ultimate battlefield. It really is. It sounds so trivial, but what you're calling the water paradox, that's where our entire understanding of how the universe is put together really starts to crack.
Because when you actually stop and look at the ingredients, it makes absolutely no sense. None.
Right.
You have hydrogen.
Right.
Okay, what is it? It's a gas. It's the lightest element, and most importantly, it is incredibly flammable. You light a match near pure hydrogen, and you get a boom.
Right.
It's the Hindenburg disaster.
A classic, very explosive example, yes.
Then you have the other part, oxygen, also a gas, and while it doesn't, burn on its own, it's literally the fuel for fire. It's the oxidizer, fire. I mean, fire effectively eats oxygen to survive.
It's what makes the burning possible in the first place.
So you have an explosive gas and a fire-feeding gas. You bond them together chemically, H2O and that, and suddenly you don't get a new, maybe weirder gas, you get a liquid.
A liquid, yeah.
And not just any liquid, but the specific liquid we use to extinguish fire.
It's a complete inversion of properties. It's astonishing when you think about it.
It feels like some kind of cosmic prank. I mean, seriously, if you were an alien physicist and you only knew the properties of individual hydrogen atoms and individual oxygen atoms, could you, from first principles, predict wetness? Could you predict fire extinguishing?
And that right there, that is the question that defines this entire investigation we're undertaking. If you look at the reductionist view, which, is the view that has dominated science for the last 300 years, the answer has to be yes. It should be yes.
Okay, so let's break that down. Reductionism is the idea that the universe is just.
Wow.
It's the sum of its parts, right? If you know all the parts, you know the whole. Simple as that.
Essentially, yes. Reductionism argues that reality is a neat hierarchy. At the very bottom, you have physics.
The fundamental layer.
Right. Then chemistry is just, a complicated application of physics. Biology is an even more complicated application of chemistry. So in theory, if you have something like the Schrödinger equation, the fundamental map of quantum mechanics, you should be able to calculate the water molecule so perfectly that wetness just pops out of the numbers.
But the source material for today's exploration, it just throws a massive wrench in that gear.
Yeah.
The whole argument we're looking at is that you can't get there from here, that wetness is something else entirely.
We are talking about the concept of emergence. And this is the idea that when you put enough simple parts together, something entirely new appears. Something that isn't just a simple rearrangement of the old stuff, but a whole new layer of reality.
And I have to say, reading through these notes, I felt like the ground was shifting under my feet. Because we're asking a really simple but also a really scary question. Is the world actually made of layers? I mean, is biology a real thing? Is psychology a real thing? Or is it all just physics wearing a disguise?
Those are the stakes of the game. It really is a battle between reductionism on one side and holism or emergence on the other.
So let's define the battlefield before we march the armies out. We mentioned reductionism being the dominant view. It's kind of the Lego view of the universe.
It is a very fair comparison, yeah.
If I build a castle out of Legos, it looks like a castle. It has a drawbridge. It has towers, the whole thing. But if I ask a hardcore reductionist, is there a castle here? They would have to say no.
They'd say, what I see are plastic bricks. They're just arranged in a castle-like shit.
Exactly. The castleness isn't a physical thing. It's just a description we use for the arrangement. If I took the bricks apart, the castle, it vanishes. It doesn't go to some castle heaven. It just ceases to be a pattern.
Correct. The pattern has no independent existence.
So in this view, if you knew the position and the movement of every single atom in the universe, you theoretically would know everything. You'd know all of history. You'd know what love is. You'd know why I chose to eat toast for breakfast this morning. It's all just atoms bumping into other atoms.
Which is an incredibly powerful, incredibly successful way to look at the world. I mean, let's be clear. It gave us the atomic bomb, modern medicine, the microchip in the device you're probably listening on. It works. But then you have the holists.
The holists are the ones standing up in the back of the room saying, wait a minute, more is different.
That is the slogan. It comes from a famous paper by the physicist Philip Anderson. Holism, or emergence, argues that when you reach a certain level of complexity, new properties appear that literally do not exist in the parts themselves.
Like the wetness of water. You can't find wetness inside a single hydrogen atom. It's not in there.
It's not. Or think about the economy. You can't find the inflation rate inside a single dollar bill. You can stare at George Washington's face all day. He's not going to tell you about the Federal Reserve's interest rates. Inflation is a property of the system, not the individual part.
So that's what we're digging into today. We've got this whole collection of articles and notes basically asking, is reality a hierarchy where new things actually genuinely pop into existence? Or are we just, are we just ignorant of the math that connects the bottom all the way to the top?
And the answer really, really matters. It matters for how we think about free will, it matters for morality, and it fundamentally matters for how we understand ourselves.
So let's get into the evidence. Because when you start looking for emergence, you don't have to look very far. You just have to look up. And I'm talking about birds.
Ah, the famous murmuration of starlings, a classic example.
If you've never seen this, you really need to go look it up right now. It looks like a special effect from a movie. It's unbelievable. You have thousands, sometimes tens of thousands of these little bird starlings.
Right.
And they fly together in this fluid, shifting cloud.
It creates these incredible flowing patterns. It pulses, it dives, it swirls around. It honestly looks like a single giant shape-shifting organism in the sky.
And the thing that always freaks me out is the reaction time. If a predator, like a falcon, dives at the flock, the entire cloud shifts almost instantly. It creates a void to dodge the predator. It creates these pulsing waves to confuse the attacker.
It gives the illusion of a single centralized intelligence. It really looks like there's a general starling in the middle, commanding the troops with a radio.
But we know there isn't. Biology tells us there is no leader. There's no conductor. There's no, choreography they practiced in the trees beforehand. So for a very long time, this was a genuine mystery. How do 50,000 individuals coordinate their movements without a leader?
The solution is fascinating because it didn't really come from biologists at first. It came from the world of computer graphics. In the late 1980s, a researcher named Craig Reynolds wanted to simulate flocks for movies. He created a program he called Boids.
Boids, like B-O-I-D-S, birdoids.
Exactly. And he realized he couldn't program the flock. That was just way too hard. So instead, he tried to program the individual birds. And he found he only needed 3 very simple rules to recreate that complex, magical dance.
I have the rules right here, and they are so deceptively simple. Rule 1 is separation. Basically, don't crash into your neighbor.
Just basic self-preservation. Don't hit stuff.
Rule 2 is alignment. Steer in the general direction your neighbors are flying.
Peer pressure, basically. Go with the flow.
And then rule 3 is cohesion. Steer toward the average position of your neighbors, which really just means, don't get left behind. Try to stay in the group.
And that's it. You program those 3 local rules that only affect a single bird and its immediate neighbors, into a computer simulation, and you don't get chaos. You get a murmuration. You get the swirling, the diving, the incredible organic movement.
And this is what the source calls the spectacle of emergence. You have this incredibly low-level simplicity, don't crash, creating this stunningly high-level complexity, a giant intelligent cloud.
And here's the real kicker. The individual bird has absolutely no concept of the flock. The bird doesn't know it's making a beautiful shape. It doesn't even know it's part of a shape. It's just trying not to hit the guy to its left.
So the flock is a kind of ghost. It's a pattern that emerges from all those simple interactions. But this brings up a really important distinction that I found super helpful in the reading. It's the difference between weak emergence and strong emergence.
Yes, this is absolutely crucial because a reductionist, or Lego person, would look at the birds and say, okay, that's amazing, but it's not magic. And that is what we would call weak emergence.
Let's unpack that. Weak emergence.
Weak emergence means that the high-level pattern, the flock, is, well, it's surprising to us humans. It's unexpected. But, and this is the important part, if you had a powerful enough computer and you programmed in those 3 simple rules, you could predict the flock. You could simulate it perfectly.
So it's deducible. It's just really, really complicated math. We only call it emergent because our human brains are too slow to do that calculation in real time.
Exactly. It's really just a shortcut word for a complicated consequence of simple rules. And most scientists are perfectly happy with weak emergence. It's everywhere. Traffic jams, stock market crashes, the way ant colonies build their nests.
But then there's the other kind, strong emergence. And this is the one that causes the the bar fights in the philosophy department.
Strong emergence is a much more radical claim. It says that no matter how big your computer is, no matter how much you know about the individual parts, you simply cannot predict the whole. The new property is fundamentally irreducible. It's almost like a new law of nature just appears out of nowhere when you put the parts together.
That's the spooky part. That's where the whole ghost in the machine idea comes from. And to really get our heads around why this is so controversial, we have to go right back to that glass of water.
The water paradox again. It's always the water.
So we've established that water is wet, hydrogen isn't. The reductionist comes along and says, look, if I use the Schrödinger equation, the fundamental math of quantum mechanics, I can calculate everything there is to know about that water molecule.
That is the standard claim, yes. A physicist would say, give me the position and momentum of every electron and proton in that glass, and I can, in principle, derive the fact that it flows.
But the expert in our source material, they push back on this, and they push back hard. They argue that there's a gap in the translation.
It's a variable problem. Think about what's in the Schrödinger equation. It deals with wave functions, probabilities, charge, spin, things like that. Do you know what variable isn't in that equation?
Let me guess. Viscosity.
Viscosity, liquidity, transparency, even temperature, really. Those concepts don't exist at the quantum level. So if you are strictly using the language of quantum mechanics, you literally cannot describe wetness. You have to switch languages. You have to start talking in the language of thermodynamics or fluid dynamics.
And this gets to that distinction between ontology and epistemology, right?
Mm-hmm.
I want to make sure I get these terms right, because they come up again and again.
You're on exactly the right track. Ontology is the study of what is, what actually exists in reality. Epistemology is the study of what we know or how we describe things.
So the reductionist is saying, ontologically, in actual reality, there is only quantum stuff. There's no such thing as water. There are just quantum fields buzzing around in a particular configuration. Wetness is just a story we tell ourselves because we're too big and clumsy to see the atoms. That makes it epistemological, a feature of our knowledge.
Correct. They would say fluid dynamics is just a useful approximation. It's a fantastic map, but it's not the territory. The territory is the quantum fields.
But the holist, the person who believes in emergence, they argue that this distinction is kind of artificial. If the story, the thermodynamics, the fluid dynamics, if that story predicts reality better and more simply than the quantum equation does, well, maybe the story is real. Maybe the liquidity is just as real as the electron.
And that's the core of the argument. Why should the microscopic stuff get to be the only real stuff? If I throw a bucket of water on you, you get wet. That wetness has real physical consequences. It seems pretty darn real to me.
And the source material gives us some really compelling reasons to think, yes, these upper levels are real. And the first big argument for this is something called multiple realization.
This is one of my absolute favorite arguments in this whole debate. I think it's very, very strong against the idea that everything is just physics at the bottom.
He uses the computer analogy, which I think is great. So think about a computer, your laptop, right? It's made of silicon chips.
Mostly, yes. Semiconductor logic gates, transistors.
But you could technically build a computer out of old school vacuum tubes.
We did. The ENIAC computer in the 1940s, it took up an entire room and needed a dedicated power plant, but it was a computer. It computed.
You could build one out of purely mechanical gears and livers, like Charles Babbage's analytical engine from the 1800s.
Correct. Clockwork computation.
You could, if you were incredibly patient, build a computer out of millions of people standing in a field passing notes to each other. Or a massive, ridiculous system of water pipes and valves.
This is a core idea in some science fiction, like the three-body problem novel, a computer made of people.
Exactly. So here's the insight from that. If I can run the exact same piece of software, let's say Microsoft Word, on a silicon chip, on vacuum tubes, on mechanical gears, and on a network of water pipes, then Microsoft Word cannot be the silicon.
Right. It can't be identical to the physical substrate. If the physical stuff changes entirely, but the function, the computation itself remains exactly the same, then the property of computing must exist independently of the material it's running on.
It kind of blew my mind a little, because it applies directly to us, to our brains.
It absolutely does. This is the standard argument for why psychology is a real science and not just a subfield of biology.
Right. So I have a brain. It's made of carbon, water, neurons, all that stuff. And I can feel pain. If I pinch my arm, ow, it hurts.
Okay, with you so far.
Now let's imagine an alien, a xenomorph, whatever. Its brain is silicon-based, or maybe it's made of shimmering gas clouds or fiber optics. If you go up and pinch the xenomorph and it winces and says, ouch, in its alien language, is it feeling pain?
Well, if you accept the principle of multiple realization, the answer has to be yes. The hardware is totally different, but the software state, the functional state we call pain, is the same.
But a really strict reductionist, someone who thinks only the atoms matter, they would be forced to say, no, human pain is defined as C fibers firing in a carbon-based brain. The alien doesn't have C fibers, so what it's feeling is not pain. It's something else.
Which just seems absurd on its face. It seems like a kind of biological chauvinism.
Right. It feels wrong. The property of pain seems like a real thing in the universe that can happen in lots of different types of hardware.
Yeah.
So pain is an emergent property. It floats above the specific hardware.
It strongly suggests that the pattern is what's real, not just the physical pieces that make up the pattern at any given moment. This is a huge strike against the idea that only the lowest, most fundamental level of reality is the real one, because the atoms can change, but the pattern can persist.
So that's argument number one for emergence being real. The pattern is transferable. Argument number two is even more pragmatic, I think. It's called causal efficacy, or as I started calling it, the so what factor.
This is basically the gold standard for being considered real in philosophy. To be real, you have to be able to push things around. You have to have the power to cause changes in the physical world.
If you're a ghost that just floats through walls and can't even move a coffee cup, are you really there?
Precisely. If you are totally undetectable and have absolutely no effect on the world, you might as well not exist for all practical purposes.
So the argument here is that these emergent properties, they do move coffee cups. The example in the notes that I just love is from a game of chess. Imagine two people playing chess. Player A moves their knight. The question is, why?
Well, a physicist standing by would say, easy. Muscles in the player's arm contracted, which pulled on tendons, which applied a force to the piece of wood we call the knight, overcoming friction and inertia.
Which is technically true. But it's also a completely useless explanation. Why do the muscles contract?
Because neurons fired in the player's motor cortex.
Okay, and why did those neurons fire?
Because of a complex electrochemical cascade triggered by signals from other parts of the brain.
No, stop. You see, that whole chain of explanation describes how the piece moved, but it completely fails to explain why it moved. The real reason the knight moved is because player A saw a weakness in player B's defense.
Ah, yes, the weakness, the strategic consideration.
Now, is weakness a physical property of the wooden board? Can you take a microscope and find the weakness on the molecules of the square E4?
You absolutely cannot. Weakness in chess is not a physical property. It's a relational property. It's an abstract concept that exists only within the rules of the game. It is purely emergent.
And yet, that abstract, non-physical thing, that weakness, caused a physical arm to lift a physical piece of wood and move it. The emergent concept reached down from the world of ideas and touched the atoms.
This is a very compelling point. If you try to explain the chess game purely with the language of physics, you miss the actual game. You completely lose the explanation for what's happening. You can describe the trajectory of the wood, but you can't describe the strategy.
There's another great example of this here from medicine, the concept of malnutrition.
Right. This works in a very similar way.
A doctor might say, this patient developed a severe infection because their immune system was compromised due to malnutrition.
That's a standard causal explanation. We accept that in medicine every single day. It's how doctors think.
But think about what that statement means. Malnutrition is a state of the whole body. It's not something happening to just one atom or even one cell. It's a system-wide lack of resources. And yet, that whole body macroscopic state causes a microscopic bacteria to win a battle against a single white blood cell. The macro is causing the micro to behave differently.
And if the reductionist insists on describing every single molecular collision that led to that specific white blood cell failing, they actually end up understanding less than the doctor. They have more data, but they have less insight. They literally can't see the forest for the trees.
Exactly. So if emergent things like a strategic weakness on a chessboard or malnutrition in a body can cause real physical changes in the world, they must be real. They have causal efficacy.
That is the holist stance, and it sounds incredibly convincing. But
there's always a but, isn't there?
The reductionists are not giving up that easily. They have a very, very powerful counterattack, and it starts with a simple accusation. You only believe in emergence because you are ignorant.
Ouch. Okay, so that's the ignorance defense.
It is the Empire Strikes Back moment of our discussion, for sure.
All right, lay it on me. Why do the physicists and the hardcore reductionists think we're all just confused?
Their argument relies on something they call the completeness of physics. They basically look at the history of science. A few hundred years ago, we thought life was magic. We thought there was a vital force, the elan vital, that animated living things.
Right, like living things had this glowing soul juice in them and rocks didn't. That was the genuine scientific consensus.
Exactly. Scientists seriously believed that organic matter was fundamentally, magically different from inorganic matter. And then we discovered chemistry. Then a chemist synthesized urea in a lab, an organic compound from inorganic materials. Then we found DNA. And piece by piece, we realized, oh, it's just very, very complicated chemistry. There is no magic juice. Life reduced to physics.
They have a point there. I mean, we used to think lightning was Zeus throwing bolts from a mountain. Now we know it's just a massive discharge of static electricity. Every time we solve a big mystery, the answer tends to be more physics.
So the reductionist says, look at the trend line. We are explaining more and more of the universe with fundamental physics. Just because we can't explain consciousness yet or the stock market yet doesn't mean they are magic, irreducible, emergent properties. It just means we haven't finished the math.
So when I say the flock of starlings is an emergent phenomenon, what they hear is, I am too lazy to calculate the trajectory of 10,000 individual birds.
It's harsh, but essentially, yes, they would point to the weather as the perfect analogy.
The weather, right. It's a classic chaotic system. We cannot predict the weather perfectly 2 weeks from now.
Right. But is that because the weather has a mind of its own? Is there a weather god up there who's deciding to rain on your picnic just to be mean?
No. It's just chaos.
Yeah. It's chaotic dynamics. We know the equations. We know exactly how air pressure, humidity, and temperature interact. The problem is one of computational complexity. To predict the weather 2 weeks out, you would need to know the precise position and velocity of every molecule in the atmosphere, including the air disturbed by every butterfly flapping its wings in Brazil.
The famous butterfly effect. Tiny changes in initial conditions lead to massive, unpredictable storms later on.
Exactly. We can't measure every butterfly, so our prediction fails. But that is a failure of measurement, a failure of data collection, not a failure of physics. The weather is still just atoms obeying the law of physics. There is no ghost in the storm.
So they would argue that the human brain is it's just really, really complex weather.
Precisely. Thoughts, feelings, consciousness, it's all just a neuronal thunderstorm. And just because it feels special and mysterious from the inside doesn't mean it is. It's just a massive calculation that we don't have the RAM to track in real time.
And this leads directly to that other concept, the map versus the territory.
Yes. This is a famous and really useful philosophical distinction.
The idea is that liquidity is a concept on our map. It's a useful word we invented to help us navigate the world. But the territory, the actual ground truth reality, is just quantum fields. And we should never confuse the map for the place itself.
Right. The map of a city might have a big red star on it that says, you are here. That doesn't mean if you go to that spot in the real city, you'll find a giant red star painted on the ground. Our concepts, wetness, weakness, anger, they are the symbols on our mental map. They help us survive. But the reductionist insists, do not mistake your survival tools for deep reality.
That's a very humbling thought. It sort of makes you feel like everything you experience is a kind of lie. A useful lie, maybe, but a lie nonetheless.
It is a very austere, very cold, but also very powerful view of the universe.
But wait a minute, I want to push back on this again, because there is one problem that the reductionists really, really struggle with. We kind of touched on it with the chess game, but it's the big one. It's the problem of downward causation.
Ah, yes. This is often called the hardest problem in the entire literature on emergence.
Right, because upward causation is easy. That's just atoms making molecules, molecules making cells, cells making me. That's just building the Lego sub. But downward causation is the idea that the finished Lego castle can reach down and boss around the individual Lego bricks.
And this is where the paradox becomes very, very sharp. Let's go back to your arm-raising example from earlier.
Okay. I am sitting here in my chair. I decide, my conscious self, to raise my right hand. Raise his hand. There. I did it. The thought caused the action.
Okay. So from your first-person perspective, you, the commander, gave an order, and the machine, your body, obeyed.
The chain of command seems to be, my mind decides, neurons in my brain fire, muscles in my arm contract, my arm moves up. Simple.
That is certainly how it feels.
But if physics is complete, as the reductionist claims, those specific neurons in my brain were going to fire anyway, right? Based on the electrical and chemical state they were in just a millisecond before.
If you believe in strict physical determinism, then yes, the atoms in your brain follow the laws of physics. They don't. They don't stop and wait for your permission to move to their next state.
So if the atoms are going to move that way anyway, according to the laws of physics, what work did my conscious decision actually do?
And that is the problem of causal exclusion. If the physical causes, the atoms bumping into atoms, are sufficient to explain the arm moving, then the conscious decision is causally redundant. It's like a child holding a toy steering wheel in the back seat of a car. They are turning their little plastic wheel and shouting, "I'm driving!" But the car is going where it's going regardless, because their parent is driving.
That is a terrifying thought. That means I'm not actually driving the bus. I'm just a passenger watching the movie of me driving the bus. My feeling of being in control is an illusion.
That is the strict reductionist conclusion, yes. Your feeling of agency is a post hoc rationalization that your brain serves up to explain what your atoms were already in the process of doing.
Okay, I refuse to accept that I'm just a passenger. And thankfully, we have the committee analogy. The source material brought this up, and I think it offers a potential lifeline here.
The committee analogy is very clever. It's an attempt to explain how a whole can constrain its parts without violating any physical laws.
So imagine a university hiring committee. Let's say it's a group of 10 professors.
A truly terrifying emergent entity in its own right, yes.
Indeed. Now, after much deliberation, the committee as a whole decides to fire a professor. We say, the committee decided. It's a group decision.
Right, it's a singular entity in that sentence.
Once that decision is made, the individual members of the committee are now forced to do certain things. The secretary has to type up a formal letter. The dean has to make a phone call. The decision of the group has caused the parts, the individual people, to act in a specific way.
Okay, but the reductionists would counter immediately. They would say, no, the committee didn't decide anything. 10 individuals cast the votes. The outcome is just the mathematical sum of those individual votes.
But, and here's where the holist counters back, the dynamic of the room mattered. The peer pressure mattered. The formal rules of the institution mattered. The shared goal of the committee mattered. If you took those same 10 people and put them at a beach party, they wouldn't have collectively decided to fire the professor. The structure of the committee, the emergent entity itself, influenced how the individuals behaved.
So you are arguing that the high-level structure acts as a kind of filter, or a constraint on the behavior of the parts.
Exactly. The whole sets the boundary conditions for the parts. So maybe my conscious mind doesn't magically reach down and push atoms around, violating the laws of physics. But maybe the pattern of my mind, my beliefs, my desires, my goals, constrains which possible paths the atoms in my brain can take. It channels them.
That's a much more sophisticated view of downward causation. It suggests that the system as a whole limits the degrees of freedom of its components. It forces them into certain channels of behavior.
Okay, that feels a little better to me. It's not magic, but it's real influence. It means the organization of the system matters just as much as the stuff it's made of.
And that leads us perfectly toward a kind of synthesis. Because, we've been treating this like a boxing match so far, emergence, real versus fake. But a lot of modern science and philosophy is starting to say, you know what? Maybe it's both.
Yeah, let's talk about the middle ground, because it feels like we don't have to choose between a universe of meaningless Legos and a universe of spooky magic.
One way to think about this is a concept called ontic pluralism.
Ontic pluralism. Okay, that sounds fancy. Break it down for me.
Well, ontic refers to reality, to what exists. Pluralism just means there are many of them. So it's the idea that reality isn't a single pyramid with one fundamental layer at the bottom. It's more like a web or maybe a network.
A web. Okay.
In this view, atoms are real. But cells are also real, and ecosystems are also real. They are just different types of reality, different levels of organization, but one isn't more real than the other.
So the hydrogen atom isn't the boss of the water molecule. They're neighbors in the web of reality.
In a way, yes. And this connects to a really cool idea from information theory called coarse graining.
Oh, the pixel analogy. I really like this one.
Right. So imagine you have a super high-resolution digital photo of a person's face. It's made of millions and millions of tiny pixels. If you zoom all the way in and look at just one pixel, what do you see? It's just a brown square or a beige square. You can't see the face at all.
Right. At that level, it's just meaningless noise, a color value.
Now imagine you coarse grain the image, you pixelate it, you blur it slightly. You are actively losing the fine-grained detail of the individual pixels, but suddenly the face appears. The pattern emerges.
The pattern emerges precisely because you stop looking at all the tiny details.
Yeah. Exactly. You actually gain meaningful information by throwing away useless information. And this is a powerful way to think about what emergence is. It's an informational relationship. The face is a real pattern in the data. It contains information, this is a photo of my Uncle Bob, that the individual pixels simply do not contain.
So the universe is full of these patterns, these faces, that only exist when you zoom out to the right level. And those patterns are real because they carry real information and have real causal power.
Yes, information is physical. And this connects directly to the modern field of complexity science. We see this kind of spontaneous pattern formation in nature all the time.
We had to talk about the slime molds.
The slime mold. It's the ultimate poster child for this kind of synthesis thinking.
Tell the listener about the slime mold. It's kind of gross, but it's absolutely amazing.
It's a single-celled organism, technically. Its scientific name is Physarum polycephalum. It's basically a blob of yellow goo you might find on a forest floor. It has no brain, it has no neurons, it has no central nervous system whatsoever. But if you put it at the entrance of a maze with a food source at the end, it will solve the maze.
With no brain.
With no brain. And it gets even crazier. There was a famous experiment where researchers in Japan placed little oat flakes on a surface in the exact geographical arrangement of the major cities around Tokyo.
Okay, I'm with you.
They then put the slime mold in the middle, on the spot representing Tokyo. The slime mold grew out in all directions to find and eat the oats. Over a few days, it retracted any pathways that were redundant or inefficient and reinforced the ones that were most direct. The resulting network of tubes it created was almost mathematically identical to the actual Tokyo railway system.
Get out of here. Really?
For real. A system that teams of brilliant civil engineers spent years designing for maximum efficiency. The slime mold figured it out in a day just by following simple local chemical feedbacks.
That is the definition of self-organization.
Yes. Nature loves to build structure for free. Zebra stripes, the rhythm of a heartbeat, the shape of a sand dune. These complex patterns arise spontaneously from simple interactions. They aren't magic in the spooky sense, though they also aren't just the parts. They are the inevitable result of the relationships between the parts.
Relationships. I think that's the key word in all of this. Reality isn't just the things, it's the web of relationships between the things.
Precisely. And that brings us right to the final question. Why does any of this actually matter to the person listening to this right now?
Yeah. The big so what? Why should I care if water is magic or not?
Yeah.
Beyond, the cool slime mold trivia for my next dinner party.
Well, let's go back to that hierarchy of science we talked about at the beginning.
Right. If emergence is real, then psychology is safe.
Exactly. If emergence is real, then fields like psychology, sociology, economics, these are fundamental sciences. They are studying real patterns that exist in the universe at a high level of organization. If reductionism is 100% true, then all those fields are just, they're messy physics. They are just temporary placeholders until we get a computer big enough to simulate all the atoms in the economy.
I have to say, I don't want to live in a world where love is classified as messy physics.
And that leads directly to the biggest implication of all, free will.
We touched on this with the arm-raising paradox, but let's really drive the point home.
It is the ultimate question of human existence, isn't it? If we are nothing more than the sum of our atoms, and those atoms follow strict deterministic laws, then every thought you've ever had, every choice you think you've ever made was actually determined at the Big Bang. You were just riding a roller coaster that was built 14 billion years ago. You have no control.
That is profoundly depressing.
But if emergence is real, if high-level mental states like beliefs and desires have genuine causal efficacy, if the mind as a pattern can constrain and direct the brain as a physical system, then you might genuinely be in control. Your choices might actually be real causes in the universe.
So believing in emergence is, in a way, it's fighting for the existence of your own soul. Or at least for the existence of your own agency.
In a secular sense, yes. It is fighting for the idea that you, the coherent thinking pattern, exist as a real cause in the universe. That you are not just a spectator to your own life.
And finally, there's morality. This is a tricky one.
It is, but let's think about a concept like justice.
Okay. Is justice an atom? No.
Is it a chemical reaction? Of course not. If everything in the world is just atoms, then an injustice, like a crime, is just a particular arrangement of matter. It isn't inherently wrong. It's just physics happening.
A murder is just a bunch of atoms called a bullet, rapidly rearranging the atoms in a victim's body.
Exactly. Physics has no morality. Atoms don't care about fairness. But if emergence is real, then a concept like justice could be a real binding property of a healthy social system, in the same way that health is a real property of a functioning biological body.
So we could say, objectively, this society is unjust, in the same way a doctor can look at a body and say, this body is sick.
That's the idea. It gives a potential grounding to moral truths. They would be emergent truths, but truths nonetheless. They wouldn't be just opinions. They would be statements about the structural reality of our social organizations.
Wow. Okay, let's try to wrap this up. It's been dense, but in a really, really good way.
It's a heavy topic. It has the potential to redefine everything you think you know.
We started with a simple glass of water, a simple molecule, H2O, and we ended up realizing that we ourselves are walking, talking paradoxes.
We are made of star stuff, of atoms forged in distant suns that follow strict, unbreakable physical laws. And yet, we are thinking, feeling, deciding beings that seem to override those very laws every single time we choose what to have for lunch.
We are the ghost in the machine.
Or perhaps we are the pattern in the noise.
And I love the final provocative thought that the source material left us with. For centuries, we've been digging down. We keep looking for the bottom level. We keep smashing atoms to find the real reality underneath. Quarks, strings, whatever comes next.
The perpetual search for the truly fundamental.
But the source asks a fascinating question. What if there is no bottom?
The old turtles all the way down hypothesis.
Yeah. What if every level of reality is just an emergent property of the one below it?
Right.
It goes on forever. What if reality is the layers? What if the relationships are all there is?
It suggests that the entire search for an ultimate particle might be a mistake, that maybe the universe isn't a box full of things, maybe the universe is a story. And the story only makes sense when you read the whole thing, not when you put the ink on the page under a microscope.
I love that. The ink is real, but the story is realer.
I might say they're equally real, just different kinds of real.
Look at you, staying neutral right to the very end.
It is my job to keep us grounded in the philosophical complexities.
Well, to everyone listening, here is your mission for the day. Go look at a glass of water, look at a flock of birds in the sky, or just look down at your own hand and ask yourself, are you seeing the atoms or are you seeing the pattern? And which one of those is really you?
It genuinely changes the way you see the world.
It really, really does. Thanks for exploring this with us today.
It was a pleasure, as always.
We'll see you in the next one.